Welcome to the Explosive Street Podcast with Jared Biggie. This is part 2 with Michael Fahey. Michael is producer and director of the film Westside Vs The World. I call it Westside Film because that's how it's listed on social media. But it's Westside Vs The World, comes out May 7th. Please, if you've not already, pre-order it so that we get it to the top of the charts. We're going to let Michael get into that and see, because it's ranked up there on iTunes. It's ranked above some big time movies, right?
Yeah, we've been so far in our first week out, we were as high as number 8 on the pre-order charts, and we've, pretty much been within the top 25 the whole time. But we spent a good part of our first week in the top 10, getting up to number 8. The only movies that were ahead of us were all major studio releases. Mm-hmm. So we're talking like, we're talking like Captain Marvel, Shazam, Us, How to Train Your Dragon. Literally the movies that were ahead of us for most of our first week on the charts. The only movies that were ahead of us on average made over $118 million at the box office each. Now, we did not have an official box office. Mm-hmm. We never actually did a box office release. We instead were, while these other movies were playing in 400, 1,200 theaters across the country each weekend, we were playing in one gym on Friday and one gym maybe on Saturday. And, we were playing to crowds of, 50 people here and 110 people there. And, we had no real, we had theater. We didn't, you didn't see us on TV or anything, or, you didn't see our trailer rolling before other people's trailers. So while everyone else had these huge multi-million-dollar, marketing campaigns, the average campaign for those movies was probably in the realm of $20 to $30 million each. We literally had $0 spent on advertising, and yet when it came time to pre-order, our fan base and our following within the powerlifting community was able to vault us up above every single other documentary and into the top 10, where the only movies ahead of us were half of them were Marvel movies and DC movies. We were
highly popular movies that people's been anticipating coming out.
Yeah.
Now, we need pre-orders, or not me, but you, the film. Mm-hmm. Because people don't wait for it to come out, because the more pre-orders that happen.
Right. It's all a matter of getting the visibility and the exposure up.
You don't want to wait for Netflix. No. And if you try and wait for Netflix, the danger is that everyone tries and waits for Netflix, and because everyone tried and waited, mm-hmm. it doesn't have the sales needed to get onto Netflix. Yeah, Netflix is going to purchase it if it has.
Yes.
So
well, Netflix, you think about it, they only every time they buy a movie, they're spending money. And how it works is that when they buy a movie they license a movie to go on to Netflix, a lot of people think that Netflix is paying like per view. So they think, well, I'll just wait and watch it on Netflix and you'll get paid that way. Well, no. How it works is Netflix pays for a period of time. So they're going to pay based on the sales, because the only thing that's real, the only way to know if people want that movie is to go, well, how many people have bought that movie? Mm-hmm. So Netflix, they go to iTunes and Amazon, and they look at the bestsellers charts, and they look and they go, wow, this movie was in the top 10. People must want it. Mm-hmm. We need to pay, big money to get that movie onto Netflix as soon as possible. The less money they pay, the later it takes to get to Netflix. Then and if it doesn't sell well, it doesn't go to Netflix at all.
Then you won't see it.
Yeah, Netflix, they're not gonna, if you go, well, my movie was 150th, it was 150th out of 500. That sounds good, but Netflix is going, yeah, but we're only buying 15. Yeah. So you need to make sure that you're in that top 15 even to get on Netflix. Then they say, well,
yeah, we're buying 15, but we're spending big money on 5. So those 5, we're going to make sure that they're listed when you turn on that main menu, that they come up as featured titles, and
instead of trying to search down the line.
Right, instead of having to manually search for it. So all of it, the faster you get sales, the faster you shoot up the charts. If you're higher in the charts, that means you're higher in the search results. If you're higher in the search results, that means it's more likely that the people who want to buy your movie see your movie, and it's more likely that it pops up in their feed. And then if it, they don't buy it if they don't know that it's there. They don't buy it if they don't see it. So every pre-order, every early purchase helps to just.
Is it important for your Kickstarters to purchase through iTunes, or how would you encourage your Kickstarters?
The Kickstarters, they've already purchased the movie. If you were at the $40 or above mark, then you've already purchased the movie. So you're going to get your movie you're going to get your digital copy a couple days early. So everyone else is going to have access to buy it and watch it on May 7th. If you're a Kickstarter backer, you're going to get it a few days early.
But if the Kickstarters, if we purchase it through iTunes, is that bad? Because it still helps.
No, if you want to continue, you want to purchase it again through iTunes, certainly go ahead. If you are a Kickstarter backer, hopefully the entire intent of Kickstarter is that you not only got a copy of the movie for yourself, and maybe you got some shirts, or maybe you got a hoodie or shoes or something else that was cool. But in addition to that, you were paying to help make the movie real. And you were hopefully trying to make it real so that it could go out into the world and make an impact. So if you are a Kickstarter backer, the most helpful thing that you can do is tell other people, hey, this movie that I helped make this movie, and now it's coming out on iTunes. Isn't that cool? I helped, that thing would not exist without me. And now when it gets out on iTunes and your friends see it, and they come up to you and they talk to you about it, you can go, yeah, I know about that. I've been on that since, but you're just now learning about that now? That's cute. I've been on that for 2 years.
Man.
And then think about in 6 months when someone comes up to you at the gym and goes, oh, man, have you seen that documentary on Netflix about Westside Barbell? And you can go, you're just now on that? I've been on that forever, man. I was on that before it even came out on iTunes. That thing wouldn't even exist without me. That's ultimately why you do a Kickstarter, is so that not only does it exist, but that it exists and it gets out as far as possible into the biggest audience possible, so that you can say, I was a part of that. So if you're a Kickstarter backer, the biggest thing you can do is to continue supporting the movie by just helping us get the word out. Yeah. Tell a friend.
Now, yeah, I think that's so cool, and I can't wait. I've not seen the film myself, but I was a Kickstarter because I love Westside, because if it was not for Westside, I wouldn't have the knowledge that I do nowadays to help other people. And so anything that I can give back to it, like I purposely have bought stuff from Louie. It may be more expensive than buying it from somewhere else. But if it was not for Louie, I'd rather pay more for a piece of equipment that comes from someone that helped me.
Right.
Instead of saying, okay, I'm going to go buy this cheaper belt squat, but I'm going to ask Louie 10,000 questions about a belt squat.
Right. That cheap version wouldn't even exist if Louie hadn't, pioneered and created and popularized that more expensive version.
Yeah, it's...
Support the source.
Yes, yeah. So if you want a belt squat, buy this, and don't. And if you're gonna buy the cheap version, don't call Louie and ask questions, because that's annoying.
Right.
Right. I mean that'd be aggravating.
Figure it out your damn self.
Yeah, and then if you want to come talk to Dave, Tate, or whoever else, don't go buy somewhere else. Then ask them the questions. Support the people that you want to learn from. Don't take something from somebody. I don't want to get off on that tangent. So,
right.
But that's it. So, why Westside? How did you get started? What made you want to do a story about Louie?
I kind of started talking about some of this stuff in the last episode we did, but You know,
It all started with the garage and stuff, but what
Yeah.
clicked to say, I'm going to do this movie on Louie?
All right. Well, so I obviously I grew up. I was exposed to all this. My dad read Powerlifting USA as if it was like Sports Illustrated.
Mm-hmm.
In my house growing up, it was the Bulls, the Bears, and Westside Barbell. My
Yeah,
dad's from
Westside Barbell, I think the first time I saw them was on Powerlifting USA.
Mhm.
And then I got the first time I met Louie was probably in '03.
Yeah.
Chris Moore, Barbell Stroke podcast, he passed away a couple years ago. He was a big Westside guy, and I borrowed 3 VHS Westside Barbell tapes from Louie.
Mhm.
I popped them in. Louie was talking so fast, and my eyes kind of went like this, and I had no clue what the hell he was talking about.
Yeah.
And so I said, there's some science behind this.
Yeah.
And the whole time I went to the University of Memphis, and I was just a meathead.
Mhm.
I wanted to get strong. And so I'd walk around campus. I had to bench day. Today's bench day, and so I was walking. Our football facility was closed. I went to the campus thing. It was closed. So we had a field house where the volleyball team and the girls basketball played. And so I said, maybe there's a weight room in there. So I was walking around campus and went through the field house, walked downstairs, and Chris came out the door, and I saw him there and said, oh, there's a rack. I said, I got to go bench. He said, you can't go in there.
Mhm.
Why not? I said, I got a bench day. I said, and you're going to spot me. And so he goes, you can't go in there, it's a lab. I said, no, that's a weight room.
Mhm.
And I went to school to play football. I didn't go to school to get educated.
Yeah.
And so I said, I got to work out. He said, that's a lab. I said, what do you mean lab? He said, that's exercise science. Then he started talking to me about exercise science. I said, that's what I want to do, because I don't know anything besides this lifting stuff.
Right.
And so I watched those VHS tapes, and then I purchased some bands, and then I went and started trying to do some speed benching.
Mhm.
And you know, like if you hear Louie talk, there's only a certain amount of time to complete a lift.
Right.
And so like if you got 45 seconds to complete that lift, no matter what the weight is on that bar, you got some of us are gonna have that whole time limit. And so I went from benching 225. I went home for Christmas, and I went to World Gym every day with my bands and some dumbbells, locked my bands down so I could do my speed bench with 3 different grips. And I came back, and we had a 225 bench rep test. The most I've ever done 225 was 25 times.
Uh-huh.
And I didn't really do a whole lot besides speed bench. And when I got back, without the bands, the bar was coming so fast off my chest. I said, am I even really doing this?
Mhm.
And I did 31 reps at 225.
Yeah.
And so then trying to go back and rewatch the films and get online articles, then get on Elite Fitness and trying to start. Then that's when the education really started happening for me. So sorry I got up on that, but that's kind of like how I kind of got involved with Louie and Westside. And so back to you with the film and how we kind of got this thing rolling.
Yeah, well, like I said, I went to Westside for the first time when I was 12. I was in Cleveland for a track and field nationals. I threw shot put. My dad agreed to chaperone the meet because to him, Cleveland was in Ohio, Columbus was in Ohio. Surely they must be right next to each other. Now they're a couple hours apart, but while we were there for a week with the rest of the team, I only competed one day. So on the days when I didn't compete, my dad had called Louie. He had, called Louie for a couple of years, I think, at that point. But he had called and said, hey, we're going to be in town. Can we stop by? So we got a rental car. We drive down. We go to Westside, and that. My dad finally meets Louie. He tries to train in with the morning group, and quickly finds that he is far weaker than they are. They have me throw medicine balls and do all these exercises in the parking lot as a young kid. I ended up throwing about 8 feet short on my shot put because I was so sore. But I wasn't in contention for like a top 3 place or anything, so it didn't really matter. The whole experience was fun and weird for me either way. But my dad meets Dave Tate, or he meets Louie, and he asks Louie, he says, Louie, I see you, I read about you doing all these seminars, but they're always in Ohio, and we lived down in Florida, we lived in Tallahassee. So
says, you know, like it's too far for us to drive. Plus, my dad's a shut-in and a recluse, and he doesn't like to leave or go on vacation ever. So, you know, Louie says, I don't do that. And yeah, he kind of yeah, my impression of Louie at this point has pretty much just evolved into like Danny DeVito's, you know, the Penguin. But he's like, I'm not gonna do that. And Dave Tate hears, and this is 1999, and he comes over and he says, you know, well, I do seminars with Louie. You know, like, where do you live? And I says, well, I got a gym down in Tallahassee. So I'll come down to Tallahassee. So Dave, you know, they set up a seminar. It's an Elite FTS seminar, and Dave Tate, you know, flies down to Tallahassee, and my dad picks him up and he drives him home. And Dave says, you know, when are we going to the gym? My dad says, you know, like right now. And Dave sits in the car, like, okay, cool. And my dad gets out of the car, goes inside, and comes back out. I was like, you know, Dave, you coming? And Dave realizes, like, oh crap, I do not ask enough questions. This guy's gym, quote unquote, is in his house, and so he leads Dave through the house, and you know, I'm playing PlayStation, and my sister's got a Girl Scout troop meeting, and we've got dogs and cats and rabbits and all sorts of animals all over the house.
And Dave's thinking, what the hell just happened?
And Dave's just walking through like, you know, great, I'm going to spend, you know, a few days in this place with these people. And I think he was actually staying in our house for this trip. So like, you know, so he's just like, what the hell have I done? Mm-hmm. You know, I sold tickets to people to come to this, and, you know, did registration for this. But the next day, people showed up, and, you know, it ended up being a good time. They all went out to, like, Sonny's for barbecue for lunch for I think it was a 2-day thing. And my dad keeps in touch with Dave, and Dave says, this went so well, let's do it again next year. And so he comes back, and he does another seminar in our garage. And there's no AC, it's just a miserable mess in the middle of August. But people come, and 1 year a guy from Australia comes, like, you know,
that's
he
crazy.
Leaves his family at Disney World, because he, like my dad, goes, Orlando, that's Florida. Tallahassee, that's Florida. They must be right next to each other. 4 hours later, you know, kids are at Disney World thinking, you know, oh, Dad will be coming home. And no, what'd you do while you were in America? Well, I went to a weird guy's house and sat in the garage. And, you know, like my family went to Disney World and probably resents me now. But, and then Dave comes back a third time in 2004 and does it again. And, you know, then sort of shortly after, Elite kind of picks up so much steam that, you know, Dave doesn't have time to deal with all that. And he stops going to, you know, people's weird house gyms and, you know, does professional facilities and more professional events like this one. And, but so I was just, you know, I grew up in a house with a monolift, and there's always the sound of a reverse hyper swinging in the background echoing through the house. And our backyard was torn up by sleds and prowlers, and all this stuff was so normal to me. And it was just this weird part of my life. And then I played football through high school. I had college football offers, not, you know, great ones, but just one day it hit me that I didn't want to play football. Mm-hmm. I just woke up one day and was like, you know, this is not, I liked playing football, but I was like, this is not, I didn't want to sacrifice what I had to study. I didn't want to sacrifice sort of the person that I would have to be, because I realized I wanted to try and do something more artistic. I wanted to do film, and no one would let you do both. So I talked my way into film school. I got kicked out of film school a year later because of massive budget cuts. I nearly dropped out of school to play Arena League football, and I found my feet in this sort of program that was a lot like film school, but with no financial backing. So they would give you like little camcorders that looked like, you know, they were terrible equipment, but it had a really great staff, and it taught you to really like humble yourself. And I ended up graduating from Florida State. I graduated top of my class within my major. I was also the lowest GPA they had ever accepted coming into my major, so I was a terrible student. I saw Andy Galpin say something about basically students who you know, or people who brag about doing that, but I was a bored and disinterested, you know, 18 and 19-year-old, and I found what I was passionate about and went full bore into it. it worked out. And I ended up, after I graduated, I got an internship on a movie called Forks Over Knives, which is about diet and health, and basically combating chronic disease through a vegan, whole foods, plant-based diet. So to many, sort of the demographics of that movie were to the furthest other end of the spectrum from Westside. But while I was working on that movie, I'm a big guy. I wasn't as big back then, but in LA, I stood out as a small giant amongst skinny jean wearing hipsters. And when I was editing Forks Over Knives, I would always wear a Westside hoodie from high school. And I was an editor, and I sat on like a big stability ball, because that was the kind of place we worked at where like everyone sat on stability balls, and you would we had one guy who would literally come into the office. He was the financier of the movie, but so it was his baby, but he would come in and he'd sit down next to me also on a stability ball, and he'd want to see a cut, and he'd be like, all right, Michael, what are we watching today? And he would literally pull out like a black hefty bag. It would just have like random vegetables in it, and he would just be eating. Like one day he just brought out a hefty bag. He walks in the door with a hefty, it's a trash bag, but he's got his lunch in it because he was a raw food, whole food vegan. So not only is he vegan, but he doesn't eat anything cooked. And so he would just bring in like a crate of vegetables, and just whatever was in the crate that day, he would just sit there and graze on it all day long. And he was rail thin and super high energy. And but we're sitting there, and I'm wearing my Westside hoodie, and this guy is eating heads of raw lettuce out of a hefty bag next to me, and I was just like, where am I? Like, this is so strange. How did my life take me here? And we worked like right next to the beach and stuff. You could smell the water coming in, and it was a very surreal sort of environment. But here I am in the middle of it, wearing an old Westside hoodie, and because I'm not sitting really on a chair, there's no back. You can see the back of the hoodie. Of course, if you've ever seen Westside hoodie, it's Nitro, the dog. And a defining sort of characteristic of Nitro is Nitro has big ass unneutered balls. And so people look at the hoodie and they go like, that's weird. That's an oddly like descriptive, detailed, sketch of a pit bull who has clearly not been neutered. So they, hey, Mike, what's on your shirt? Oh, it's a dog performing a deadlift by its collar. Okay. Why? And also, why does it have balls? Like, what?
Why does the dog have
Why
balls?
Why does it have this obscene detail? And so that led to me telling this, this office full of like, sort of like new wave hippies and vegans, all about Westside. And it's from this gym called Westside Barbell. And they're like, it's from a gym? I go, yeah, well, it's a really hardcore gym. It's like the hardcore gym. And what's a hardcore gym? Well, it's generally it's a powerlifting or a strength focused gym, or some sort of strength sport, but powerlifting in this instance. And so they participate in the most extreme form, multiply. So, they're lifting, the guys are benching 1,000 pounds, they're squatting 1,200, they're deadlifting 900. And, these numbers just seem absurdly large to most people. And they're like, how is that possible? And, well, they use this, gear and suits. And they're like, and it just, every question they ask, the answers get stranger and weirder. And they're like, and who runs this? And I go, well, it's a man who's in his 60s, and his name's Louie Simmons, and he's sort of, he's almost like a cult leader, and they're like, and why do all these people follow him? Well, he's been an elite powerlifter for 37 years, and he was top 10 for 30. And
You got the world's strongest gym.
yeah, and I'm reading that, they've had, 130 something world records at that point. And, just every story that I tell them, and they're, like, it just gets weirder and weirder. And I'm telling them about Matt Dimmel, and I'm telling them about, some various forms of criminality, and they're just like, you know, like, how is this place real? Why do they do it? And I was like, oh, why do they do it? Some people would say, you know, deep-seated self-loathing, and other, you know, issues of personal resentment, and, you know, other people, you know, maybe they were undersized and they wanted to do something that they could excel at as an athlete, or, you know, maybe they're just adrenaline junkies, or they, you know, just want to inflict a certain amount of pain on themselves. I don't know.
So wearing the hoodie just kind of really started.
Yeah,
it started piquing people's interest.
Yeah, the hoodie sparked a conversation, and one of the girls in the office who would ask me the most questions, she was a few years older than me. She was sort of like a mentor, or almost like a big sister kind of to me once I moved out to LA. She was the next closest person to me in age in terms of in our office. That movie had 6 people working on it, and it was, you know, on most days we would only have 3 or 4 people in the office, and all the other people were, you know, in their late 30s or their 40s or their 50s, and so it was like me as a 22-year-old, and then this 26-year-old girl, and then everyone was significantly older than us. So, you know, naturally we kind of bonded and gravitated towards each other. And she was from Simi Valley, on the outskirts of LA, a wealthy suburb. She was a vegan. She had never done any sort of organized sport. She had just started doing, I think, like Bikram yoga, but she had never really exercised. She wasn't athletic in any way, shape, or form. And then I came from Tallahassee, where every single kid plays football, and everyone plays it. You know, I ran track during the summer. I played football all fall. I played soccer and baseball when I was younger. I played basketball in high school, and, you know, if I didn't have practice, I was at home in the gym, and I was, you know, it was max effort day, or it was dynamic effort day, it was upper body day, or it was lower body day, or it was maybe just GPP day and I was just doing sled and reverse hypers. You know, every single day of my life, for the first 18 years of my life, I was a very regimented athlete. And I came from a place where, you know, my friend group in Tallahassee, I'm 6'2.5", 6'3", and I was the shortest person in my friend group. I had friends who all went to, you know, I had friends who played college ball, and I had friends who went to the NFL, and I had friends who played minor league baseball, and, you know, some of the major league baseball, and I had friends who went on to become professional track athletes, and that was considered a realistic outcome where I was from. I was looked at among my friends and family and the kids that I went to high school with, I was looked at as ridiculous for wanting to work in film and television, which is an industry that employs probably, you know, 1 million people in the U.S. Maybe not that high, but certainly, you know, tens of thousands of people in L.A., and you know, likewise in New York, likewise now in places like Atlanta and New Orleans. I wanted to work in an industry that was, you know, had thousands of job openings. And that was so bizarre where I came from in North Florida, and you know, the land of football and rednecks and, you know, beach culture, and, you know, it was seen as more realistic to go to the NFL than to simply move to Los Angeles. Mm-hmm. So Westside and training for sports was so natural to me. And then I go out to LA, where it's not cool for kids to play sports the same way. Mm-hmm. You know, there's little pockets where kids play sports, and maybe kids at this school, they play this sport and they play that sport at that school. But I came from where, like, everyone played every sport. And,
yeah, much bigger in the South than it is out West.
Yeah, athletics was life, and you go out West, and it was this weird cynical thing that, like, all the kids made fun of, like, oh, you played a team, you know, you played a team sport and you played it for your school, you know, like you were invested in something. That's lame.
Yeah.
And you know, so to these people out in LA, I was like fascinating in this manner. So they're like, you watch football? I was like, yeah, I love football. You know, like, you don't? And they're like, you want to go? You know, I just got tickets to a game. Do you want to go? Do you want them? And, yeah, like, I'll go to the Coliseum. I'll go to the Rose Bowl. I'll go to Staples Center. I'll go to, you know, I'll go wherever. I love watching sports. And but so I was fascinating and strange to them, like an alien. And I ended up telling this girl all these sort of stories about Westside, and she would just keep asking me. And meanwhile, I was like a 22-year-old who, when I started that movie, I was an intern. And just over time, people kept quitting for a lot of different and strange reasons. People did not like working on that project. And so someone would quit. And whenever someone would quit, it would be unexpected, and they would throw, you know, their folder over to me and go, Michael, you know, until we find someone to replace them, here, try and take up this work. I go, okay. You know, and I'm an intern, and I'm just like, you know, well, maybe
if you keep doing this work, they'll hire
yeah,
you.
maybe they'll have to keep me on for this. Yeah. And even further than that, I made up a really complex file system to digitize all their video, and I created a code for it, and I made it purposefully confusing. And the code
so they'd have to.
The code was misleading. Yeah, so they finally, my internship ended. They let me go. A week later, they called me back and said, like, we need you to come back in because no one can figure out where any of this footage is. Do you know where it is? I said, yeah, I know where all the footage is. So I knew the code. I made the code. And then they, you know, eventually, you know, someone would quit. Okay, now you're the, you know, now you're the PA. Someone would quit. All right, now you're the assistant editor. And then someone, you know, then an editor quit. So then they had to bring me back. You know, I got let go 7 times. And I got brought back every single time. And finally, the last time, they were on about their 12th editor. Editors just kept quitting that job. And on the last editor, he said, you know, they said, you know, like, what do you, the guy said, you know, I'm quitting today. He only did half a day, and he said, I'm not coming back after lunch. But when I leave, what's going to happen? And they said, well, I guess we're just going to have to find somebody. He goes, no. When I leave, literally, what is the next thing that will happen? Are y'all just going to go home and shut down? And they go, well, no. I said, well, what's going to happen? You know, like, who's going to edit? And then the one of the producers said, well, he'll fill in for the day. And they said, how long has Michael worked here? He said, well, like 6 months. I said, was Michael here when the first editor was here? And he said, yeah. And he was here when the second editor, the third, the fourth, the fifth. You know, like, and he goes, and so every time you lost an editor, what happened? And he said, well, Michael fills in for a couple days. And he goes, so Michael's edited some of this, you know, like, some of this is his.
Yeah.
And they said, well, yeah, I guess. And they said, and you can't get an editor to come back. They said, no. They said, but he comes back. They said, yeah. And you go, and you've gone through how many people? And he said, guys, that's your editor. The kid's your editor.
Yeah.
And I'm 22, and I'm sitting in the back, like, and my honest thought was like, oh my God, they're gonna hand this over to me? This project is a shit show. You know, I didn't even come out to LA to be it. I have no background in this. It's like, I can sort of do it, but this isn't what I do. But so anyways, eventually it ended up being like me and the executive producer who would eat the vegetables out of garbage bags. And everyone else went, you know, they went on to their next jobs. And eventually one of the editors called me up and said, like, hey man, I work at NFL Network. I think you'd be awesome over here. I said, cool. And I spent 2 years at NFL Network. And then a woman called me up and said, you know, hey, we're doing this show on tailgating. I remember that you like football. It's a Travel Channel show, so you got to travel. You know, do you want to go to Auburn to go to a football game? You'll have to sit like first row, and you're gonna have to go to tailgates all day long. And I was like, that sounds awesome. Like, you'll pay me to do that? Yeah. And it's just like, okay, but next week you have to go to a Stanford game and do the same thing. I was like, yeah, this is incredible. Like, I will do this forever. And but then that same girl, a year and a half later, she ends up calling me and she goes, "Hey, I left the company we were at, and I now am a development executive at a reality company." And it was a really big reality company. They had something like 180 shows that they had placed on network. And she said, "I just got out of a meeting earlier today, and she said, we're having really hard times selling shows lately." She said, "People want reality television that men want to watch. She said, we're looking for like tough, masculine content." And she said, as this network was telling me what they wanted, all of a sudden I remembered that story that you told me. And again, when I was 22 and I was an editor on Forks Over Knives, which by this point I was like 24, 25, and Forks Over Knives had ended up doing really well, and it got picked up and was really popular on Netflix. By far the most popular thing I've ever been associated with. Not very well reviewed, but it had a huge impact. But when I was working on that, I did not really believe that I was an editor. I did not really believe that, I didn't believe in myself and my skill and ability.
Yeah.
I had nothing to gauge it against. I couldn't tell if just I got lucky and worked on a really dysfunctional project, or if I had something, legitimate and unique to offer. But this woman calls me and says, that she remembered a story that I had told her 3 years earlier when I was 22.
Yeah.
And again, she was the furthest person from who would care. And she could remember, and that told me two things. Number one, that the story must be pretty good for her to remember it.
Yeah.
As a non-athlete.
Yeah, because people remember stuff better if you tell it as a story.
Right. But then beyond that, not only must the story be good, but this woman, her whole job was that she professionally looked for stories that could be made into something profitable. And she not only did she like the Westside story, but she liked and she remembered the way that I had told it. So I thought, well, damn, maybe I can, her whole job is that she tries to find people who can tell stories and find stories that can do something. And she sought me out. I didn't know that I was pitching an idea to her.
Yeah.
But it stuck with her.
Yeah.
And so that was like a big boost in confidence, and I thought, okay, well, and then it just became, I was like, I have to quit my job. Because I have to quit my job and figure out how to make this. Because this is a story that I know. It's, because that's how I've trained my whole life, or trained when I was younger for athletics. And because athletics were such a big part of my life. And I mean, literally, when I was 15, 16, if you asked me who my favorite athletes were, I would have said Michael Jordan, Brian Urlacher, and Chuck Vogelpohl. I had daily discussions about Chuck Vogelpohl. I remember doing, we called them CV deadlifts, doing Chuck Vogelpohl deadlifts in 110
You'll
degree
find out
heat.
who Chuck Vogelpohl is as soon as they pre-order that movie.
Oh yeah, yeah. Hopefully you already know who Chuck Vogelpohl is, but if you don't, it's not too late. And you will definitely appreciate knowing about Chuck. But from there, I quit my job.
And he said, "Louie, we're making a movie about you."
Well, actually, I quit my job, and then I got offered a job working on a Bobby Bowden documentary. And I thought, well, okay, this is pretty sweet. I'll work on the Bobby Bowden documentary. And I was waiting for that to get started, and it kept getting pushed back. And then one day, my dad called me and said, "Hey, I got you a meeting with Louie." And mind you, at this point in time, I had not talked to my dad about Westside in years. Mm-hmm. I had not had a serious discussion about Westside in probably 8 years at this point. And my dad goes, I got you a phone call with Louie. I go, what do you mean? I didn't even know who he was talking about when he said Louie. Mm-hmm. I said, Louie who? And he goes, Louie Simmons. I said, about what? And he goes, about Westside. I said, what? why am I talking to Louie about Westside? He goes, you know, making a documentary about him. And I was like, oh, I forgot I even like told you about that. And I was like, no, I'm working on something else now. Like, I don't need to make that now. I've got to, you know, like, I'm going to make a football documentary, and it's going to take me back to Tallahassee, and, you know, it's going to be about the team that I grew up rooting for and stuff, like my hometown team. Like, I got a perfect setup. And he's like, well, no, I told Louie, and I really think that if anyone can tell this, it's you. And I was like, well, you're my dad, so thank you. But I ended up having a phone. Louie called me, and he picks up the phone, or I pick up the phone, and he goes, hello? And I said, hi, is this Louie Simmons? I said, hey, Louie, it's Michael Fahey. My dad told me you'd call, and heard you want to make a movie about me. I said, well, yeah, I wanted to make a documentary and, you know, kind of style it in the form of, and he goes, well, let me stop you. No. And I was just like, whoa.
Did that intrigue you to do it more, or did you say?
Yeah. I instantly wanted to make it more. And then I had already talked to some other people about the idea. Mm-hmm. Like a year or two earlier, I talked to some people about the idea of making a Westside movie. And everyone I talked to said, don't do it. Like, friends said, yeah, that sounds like a bad idea. Like, no one's going to buy that. No one's going to care. You know, it sounds like you're going to waste your time. I was like, all right, well, you know, why? And they're like, well, you know, and then people would go, it sounds like it'll be really hard. It sounds like you won't, you know, be really like a willing subject. And, you know, it sounds like, you know, maybe they won't really grant you access and stuff. And I was like, yeah, but that just kind of, like, that's all challenges.
And that creates a story.
Yeah.
In itself.
Yeah, and that creates a story. And then, like, finally I talked to, like, I ended up talking to Chris Bell at one point, and Chris said, like, you know, like, I interviewed a lot of those people for Bigger, Stronger, Faster, and they're really tough interviews, and they don't like the camera, and they don't like, you know, and they just keep telling me stuff, and I'm like, yeah, but that's what makes them so fascinating. Then I just became, like, you know, I was obsessed with it. Then the Bobby Badman thing came up. But then I have a conversation with Louie, and he tells me no, like 12 seconds in. But then he goes, well, what would you want to do? And so
he's kind of on the north side and on the south side.
Yeah. And so, but I start to tell him, like, okay, well, I think we would kind of do it this way. And at this point in time, like, I had this idea of Westside that was largely shaped by, like, conversations that I had with Dave Tate, you know, back between, you know, 2000 and 2004, and the tapes that I had watched that, you know, my dad had ordered that were all, you know, made in the late or early to mid 90s, and then, you know, around like 2003, and stuff that I had read from the Book of Methods when I was like in high school. And
yeah, I'm missing some pages of that thing because I wore that book out.
Yeah, but also, like, you know, like, so I know this very, like, two-dimensional version of everything. But in the meantime, like, Chuck had left. All the big lifters and all the big names had left. You know, Dave Tate wasn't, he didn't even compete anymore. And, you know, like, all these names, there's so much turnover and turmoil. And, you know, now, like, or by this point in time, it's like 2014. You know, raw lifting has taken over, and, you know, like, YouTube has exploded, and Instagram, and, you know, social media lifting is a thing now. And I go back and look, and I'm like, I was like, I assumed that, like, if powerlifting got big, that everyone would know about Westside. I was like, that's what must have gotten big, right? You know, I was going like, oh, so, like, everyone loves, like, the WPO, and everybody, you know, wears Leviathan's squat suits, and what I found was like, no one knows what's happened to the last 25 years of powerlifting. And, you know, it was this weird, like, it was as if, like, a nuclear bomb had gone off just within the world of strength and conditioning, and it was like, you know, all knowledge from the last 30 or 40 years has been destroyed, you know, by radioactivity, and you know, like, now all there is, you know, linear and 23-year-old internet gurus and vloggers, and I was just like, this is such a weird sport now. And I was like, no one likes this really hardcore, crazy thing. And then, of course, that made me want to tell it more.
Yeah, and Westside is a thing.
Yeah, and
it's an animal.
Yeah, and so I ended up talking to Louie for like 45 minutes, and then finally he says, "Well, don't want to do it, but he says, how tall are you?" I said, like 6'2", 6'3", and he goes, "How much do you weigh?" I said, like 208, 210, and he goes, "No, you need to be at least 275. I'm going to send you some stuff. I'm going to send you some shirts. What size do you wear?" I said, "Well, I wear large." And he's like, No. Double XL. I'm going to send you double XL. And he goes, "Okay, well, talk to Christy. All right, bye." And I assumed, like, okay, cool. That was neat. I had a relatively long conversation with Louie, and he told me no, like, 50 times. And, all right, maybe he'll send me a shirt. Who knows? Off to Bobby Bowden. Well, then, within a few days, the Bobby Bowden thing falls apart. The funding just disappears, and they're like, "Oh, now we don't know when we're going to start it again." And spoiler that it ended up getting funding, probably a year later, and it came out maybe a year ago or so. So that movie ended up being fine, but and I actually worked on it a little bit, but. When it fell apart, I was like, okay, well, I don't know what I'm going to do now. And then a big old box arrives. It's every book and every DVD that Westside has.
And so he ended up sending you this stuff.
He ended up sending me all the books and all the DVDs, along with a whole bunch of shirts that were all double XL.
The thing I know about Louie is, like, I've come to visit him several times. 2003, then I think I brought one of my kids up here in 2008. Then I came back again without my kids.
Yeah.
And he asked, and this was probably about a year, maybe a year and a half after the 2008 visit, maybe 2000, early 10. And he goes, "How are your kids doing?" And because he knew I was coming, because he asked if I'd come. He always likes people to come to the gym and stay and invite, especially if you're interested in training and stuff.
Yeah.
He said, "You need to come stay with me for 2 days." So I came up here 2 days, and he said, "How are the kids?" and stuff like that. And he's not seen the kids in 2 years, so I was like, that's kind of cool to ask about kids. And so the second day I was there, he brought me a whole bag of shirts. "Hey, here, give these to the kid." And so I thought that was really cool. And not only that, he's so giving of his time. He even left the gym to escort, because I was kind of lost. It was before the iPhones and really stuff started hitting. So he left the gym, escorted me back to the airport.
Yeah.
And so he remembers. And like, if you ask him a question in the book, "Hey, it's on this page, this book."
Oh yeah, that's the craziest thing. He doesn't remember, like, names.
Yeah.
Like, I would be shocked, frankly, if he was able to say both my first and last name correctly. He never, you can see it. He goes out of his way to avoid saying people's names.
Yeah.
So you see him and it's just, "What's up? What's up? How's it doing? How's it going?" And he punch you in the arm or something, or grab you and tussle with you or whatever. But, like, won't say your name. But, like, he'll remember things about you. He'll ask me about athletes that I told him about that I grew up with. How's that? The 400 runner, right? The one he didn't run for a long time, then he ran. I'm like, "Lou, I told you that like 3 years ago." I don't even know how that guy's doing. Like, I don't know. It was a one-off conversation we had. Oh, okay, well, I was thinking about that the other day, and it's like, whatever.
So you got the box, and then that just clicked.
Yeah, I got the box, and I said, like, okay, this guy told me no 50 times, and then he sent me a giant box. It was like 5 shirts and, hoodie and all this stuff, and like 9 DVDs and 6 books, and I was like, that's not a no. Like, that's a challenge. And so I read everything, and then 2 weeks later I called him. And I read everything, and I read it again. I watched everything, and I watched it again. And I call him, and then we talked for like an hour. And he said, still no, but give me a call sometime. So I read everything, and I watch everything.
Do you think
again.
he was wanting to see how bad you wanted to do it?
Or
do you
maybe.
think he meant probably a legitimate
he
no at
either-
first, but then after a couple of times, he's got like,
Yeah.
I want to see if this guy really wants to do this.
Yeah, it's a combination of, you know, it's a combination of probably like, man, fuck that guy, you know, like, well, I'll just run him off, you know, like, you know, I'll just keep telling him no, like, eventually he'll quit. And then, sort of at the same time, like a morbid curiosity of like, I wonder, you know, like, does that guy really want it? You know, like, he's always, and if you go to the gym, like, he always tests everyone. But so this went on for months, where every like 2 weeks we would talk, and the talks would just get longer and longer and longer. And you know, we complain about the state of coaching, and we complain about all kinds of, you know, I got to hear like every gripe he had with every, you know, every kind of critical argument of him, and the things that he was really into, and the people who he thought who really understood what he was saying. And finally one day he goes, I can kind of see how this would happen. And I was like, okay, Louie, let's just stop right there. Like, you're gonna say yes eventually. You're gonna tell me yes. I'm gonna keep calling until you say yes, and then I'm gonna George Costanza you and just hang up the phone the moment you say yes. I'm just gonna, great, I'll talk to you later. Click. And I'll show up at, you know, I'll show up at your door. And that's when we'll talk later. Like, I'm gonna get the answer that I want from you, because I'm gonna wear you down. And he just kind of laughed. All right. And you know,
What was the turning point? What was the clicking? How did you get the yes you needed? You remember?
I don't really know. I will say that when I started interviewing him in person, one thing that Louie likes Louie likes different things from different people, and Louie likes like really rough and tumble people. I'm a really stubborn person. I'm a really perseverant person. I don't quit. I don't back down. But I don't come off as, you know, tough by the measure of Westside. But Louie also likes really curious and really intellectual people. So I tried to speak more to sort of that side of him. And we were talking one day about, he was talking about some concept of it. Basically, the conversations were often him complaining that people didn't understand physics. You know, that's a real common theme with him. You know, you say, well, you know, Louie, what's the first book I should read? And he goes, the first book anyone should read is a physics book. You got to, you know, Newton's laws, and you know, you got to know the laws of motion. And
Physics, biomechanics, and mathematics.
Yeah. And I'm a really big believer in, you know, everything is mathematics. And I work in, you know, what I do, most people go like, oh, that's an art.
Physics is a branch of mathematics.
Right. You know, physics is just a manner that you do mathematics in. But I work in a field that is an art. And yet, if you ask me, there is no such thing as art. It is all math. It is just, you know, your art is just, which math do you choose to apply? Which math are you good at?
Yeah.
Because for me, telling a story, every character is basically an equation. You know, so a good character, they act according to their equation, and you know, stimulus coming in produces an outcome. And that's how coaching works, and that's how athletics works, and that's how everything works. But so I understood sort of like that concept and applying it to like everything. And we were talking about sports, and I was saying how, again, I've worked at the NFL Network. I worked for the NFL, and one of the things that I did, because in a highly technical position, it was very rare. I was an editor. It was very rare that editors would have a sporting background. You know, that's something that sort of doesn't mesh usually from a personality standpoint. It's a strange thing there, even at the NFL Network, that you would have a football background. But we were talking about, and again, I'm a Florida State guy, and it was Jameis Winston's draft year, and I was seeing all these people talking about how he had a really long, slow release. I said, that's bullshit. I said, the man's a pitcher. He throws a 95-mile-an-hour fastball. How do you throw a 95-mile-an-hour fastball slow? His throwing motion for football and baseball was the same. So I said, so how do you throw a fastball slow? You can't. If your arm is moving slow, the ball comes out slow. If your body moves slow, the ball comes out slow. So you can't move your arm slow and the ball come out fast.
Yeah.
I said, what you're confusing and I start saying this to Louie, and I saw like the wheels in his head kind of turn, that this seemed like sort of an argument that he would make about lifting.
Yeah, because it's not heavy or light; it's either fast or slow.
Right.
That's Louie's world. It's not like I had a parent the other day. It's too heavy. If they can move it, it's not too heavy.
Right. Well, and I say to people all the time, like, I go, oh, like, people will say, like, well, I don't believe in velocity training, and I'll go, I don't believe you know what you're saying. Mm-hmm. Well, what do you mean? I go, well, when you go to the, like, I just point at something and go like, what is that? Mm-hmm. What is that? Well, that's a bar. How much is on it? What's on that bar? 135. 135 what? 135 pounds. I go, is 135 pounds a weight? I go, yeah. I go, what is pounds a measurement of? Force. What is force? It's mass times acceleration. We don't do mass lifting, we do weight lifting, because we measure everything according to the force of gravity. There's a contextualization of everything. We literally measure our sport in a measurement of speed. You cannot divorce the speed of gravity, because we are measuring it by you can call it force, you can call it speed, you can call it velocity. It's all the same thing, is that there is this constant motion.
Yeah.
It's inherent to the name. You are weight training. You're not mass training. We don't go move mass, we go move weights.
Yeah.
You're creating force. All of this is measured. It's like there's a reason we use these terms. So if you don't measure things, and speed involves, speed is basically an acknowledgement of time. So like, whether it's the throwing motion of Jameis Winston, and what you all are seeing as a long, slow release, I'm seeing as a long release that happens in the same or shorter time than a compact release. And that's why his ball velocity is higher, because in the same amount of time, and I was at NFL Network and people disagreed with me on this. So I said, okay, we've got all the college footage. Let's start breaking it down. Give me his worst. Choose, Marcus Mariota's best game. Choose Jameis Winston's worst game in terms of velocity, and let me show you something. So I took every single throw, and frame by frame, we counted. I said, when does the throw start? And they said, when the ball separates from the hand and starts to come back. So I said, okay, that's your definition of when a throw starts. When does the throw end? I said, when the ball is released. So, okay, so when the ball starts to come back and when the ball comes out, that's the throwing motion. You set the rules. I want you to set the rules, and I will show you something. So we took 50 throws from each. We broke down the average time per throw. And everyone said Marcus Mariota had the fastest throw. He had the fastest release in the draft because he had the shortest. He was the fourth slowest. Jameis Winston was he was the fourth fastest. Jameis Winston was the second fastest. Brett Hundley was actually the fastest. Jameis, they said he had a longer, he looked slower because he had it was a more pronounced throwing motion. So then someone said, well, safeties can see his throwing motion better. I said, yeah, they can see it better. But guess what? How do those safeties, what's the limiting factor on those safeties when they react? Time.
Yeah.
the ball is going faster when it leaves his hand, and his throwing motion is happening faster. So even though it's a bigger motion, easier for them to see, they just have less time to react to it.
Yeah, throwing off the reactions, you know,
Right.
That's a big thing.
Right. So I said versus, and
Did you go all in this with Louie and stuff like that?
oh, I went. Louie was driving me. He was driving me across town, and we actually got to where we were going. And Louie just parked the car and sat and looked at me as I ranted about this. And she goes, I never thought about that. And we talked about all kinds of things. And I said, that's why so many quarterbacks who have these pitching backgrounds. Even right now, you look at Kyler Murray, you look at Russell Wilson, guys who have real quick releases. But Russell Wilson, when he came out, he dropped in the draft. Part of it was because they said he has this elongated windup. But the windup's happening in the same fraction of a second as someone's short windup, which just means when he lets go of the ball, it's humming. So that means that players have the same amount of time to react to his throwing motion, but they have less time to react to the ball in the air. So he's a more effective quarterback.
Yeah, just because it's short motion don't mean it's fast, and just because it's long don't mean it's slow. Just kind of like a big muscle don't mean it's strong, and a small muscle don't mean it's weak. It's kind of, you can kind of really apply it to everything, and people need to realize Louie's a powerlifting gym, but he knows a lot about the sports world and how that lifting applies to the sports world. And that's probably how, maybe this guy's got something.
Yeah, and it was really just, these were concepts. I was basically just pointing out constants within physics and saying, like, this idea cannot work in baseball and fail to work in football because both are played under the same gravity. They're played on the same planet. Time is relatively the same for both. You can't say that a guy goes out onto a pitching mound and because the ground is clay and he wears, pinstripes, that he throws the ball fast, and then you put that same guy on the grass and you redraw the lines and say, well, now it's football, and that same guy is slow. No, he's able to apply force into an implement. He's able to apply force into an implement. In the same way, you make a kid stronger. One kid wants to get faster, one kid wants to get stronger. Both kids want to get stronger. They might not understand it, but see, one kid is failing to realize that physics are constant. One kid is saying, I want to, improve my force production and improve my rate of force development. And I want to improve them each, in relative, synchronicity to each other so that I propel myself faster by creating greater force and creating greater force faster. And one kid is going, I want to create greater force because I don't understand that time is tied to everything. Time is tied to everything. Time is the most underrated, element of storytelling. It's the most underrated element of economics. It's the most underrated element of physics. It's the most underrated element of everything. Time.
You can always make more money, but you can't never get more time.
Right. So it becomes, so if you think about making money in terms of making more money, you're just going to work yourself to the bone. Yeah. The guy who's going to get rich is the guy who thinks about, how do I make more money in the same amount of time?
Yeah, it's like that. I think I heard a story today, actually, about the guy who ate 50 hot dogs or whatever, the hot dog champion was. Because a lot of people were only doing 25. I think he did 50.
Yeah.
It's just kind of like that one thing. He figured out how to eat that one hot dog faster.
Yep.
And so once he figured out how to eat one hot dog faster, it just led to the next hot dog.
Yeah.
And so I thought that was a pretty interesting thing. It's just, how do you do that one thing better?
Yeah.
And then just leads to the next.
Yeah.
And it's all within the constraints of time, because you got to eat so many in a certain amount of time, just like you only got so much time to make that lift happen.
Yeah. Well, it's the same as, this past week I've been on a kick of talking about time while relating it to popular opinions within powerlifting. And I said, it's strange to me that everybody, you ask a new USAPL lifter, who's the greatest of all time? Ed Coan. You ask an old, RPS or XPC or WPC, ask an old multiply lifter, who's the greatest of all time? Ed Coan. What classification of lifting did Ed Coan lift in? Single ply for the most part. That was he did his damage in single ply. And yet you ask the internet nowadays, who's the greatest powerlifter of all time? The internet will by and large come to a consensus, which is weird and rare. As a consensus, they'll say Ed Coan. And yet you ask them, what do you think about geared lifting? What do you think about equipped lifting? And by and large, the popular opinion, which again is going to be driven by people who are, disproportionately very new to the sport and relatively uneducated about the sport, but they will be in a relative consensus where 70, to 80% of them will say Ed Coan. And you go, wait a second, 70 to 80% of you all say Ed Coan, but 70 to 80% of you all say that there shouldn't be geared lifting. Yet you all agree that Ed Coan was the greatest. Why was Ed Coan the greatest? And then they'll all say, well, because he set 77 world records. How do you set 77 world records? Oh, it's because you dominated for a long time. And you go, so how long? So it's the sheer volume of accomplishment in a sport where you only compete, you compete very infrequently. So the only way to have that volume of accomplishment is to last a really long time. And then others will be more direct with saying he is the greatest because he lasted for so long. He was at the top for so long. And then you go, okay. So we're all in agreement that it's his time, it's his longevity, it's the span of achievement. How did he stay healthy for that span of time? Can you find a raw lifter who stayed healthy for 20 years? And the key is, you can find raw lifters who were healthy for 20 years. They're not very good raw lifters. You can't, it's kind of like Louie says all the time, the horse that comes up, it's the horse that runs first that gets hurt. The horse that comes in last never gets hurt. The slow horse does not get hurt. It's the fast horse. So you go, okay, so Ed was the fast horse, but he stayed together for 20 some odd years. And, as one of the absolute best. And you go, how many raw lifters were able to do that? Zero. None. None have ever come close. Raw lifting's been back as a popular construct for 11 years now, as the dominant form of powerlifting. And yet the top 10 11 years ago, I don't think you can find a top 10 list for any of the classifications in which any of the lifters in any of the weight classes are still in the top 10 today, 11 years later. Yet Ed Coan, everyone agrees that he's the greatest because of the time. Yet this newer, younger generation of lifters that looks at him and says he's the greatest because of time fails to acknowledge that, hey, maybe a big contributing factor to his time was the fact that he had the support of equipment, he had the support of gear. And then you know what? There's a lot of, Chuck Vogelpohl was great starting a few years after Ed and continuing a few years after Ed. Chuck Vogelpohl was one of the best in the world for roughly the same span of time. And then you go, there's been lots of geared lifters who last forever. I was hanging out with Dave Hoff today, and Dave Hoff is, possibly one of the most loathed figures in popular powerlifting because he competes in multiply. But you know what? The raw lifters in 2008 were complaining about Dave Hoff, and the raw lifters in 2019 are complaining about Dave Hoff. But the raw lifters who were complaining about Dave Hoff in 2008, they're not competitive lifters anymore. They've burnt themselves out, but yet their nemesis has managed to stay in the game and stay at the top of the game.
And still climb, because he's supposed.
And still climbing.
Yeah.
And he's still setting world records. He's still besting himself 11 years later, you know, and he started 15, you know, he started 5 years before that. So he's able to continue climbing because of, you know, he lifts in a, you know, certainly with conjugate methodology. It's that idea of, you know, I'm not looking to make you better 9 weeks to the next 9 weeks. I'm looking to make you better year over year for many years.
Yeah, it's a marathon. It's not a sprint.
Right.
You know, it's like I say, who lifts the longest gets the strongest. You know, like,
right.
And I tell even some of the kids, like, if you try to push too fast, you're going to break. Your RPMs are too high. That engine's going to give out sooner.
Yeah.
You know, if you drive your car in moderation, because it's not like what Louie is saying, it's optimal.
Mm-hmm.
It's not maximal.
Yeah.
It's optimal, and so the optimal takes a little bit longer time
Mm-hmm.
to get the, you know, so it may take my car a little longer to go from point A to point B, but my car is going to continue to go instead of wearing at the higher RPM to where I may give out of gas sooner,
Mm-hmm.
something's going to break down, and once that breaks down, it really makes the tortoise and the hare story come to life.
Right.
You know, you're going to pass them by.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Well, it's even, you see, you know, there's some people who criticize Westside of Conjugate and say that it's low volume, which is insane. But
I think it's people that really don't understand, because there is a lot of volume.
right, it's a high volume program, but they'll maybe look at one workout from it. They'll
Maybe
kind
even
of
just one lift.
right. Exactly. They'll look at one lift. So they'll look at the amount of work that you do over one lift.
Mm-hmm.
But you go, you know, then they'll say, well, in my program, you know, we do 50 reps. And you go, yeah, but your program, you only squat once a week.
Mm-hmm.
So now let's add in the weight from max effort day as well.
Start
the sets of
calculating.
reps.
Yeah.
So now let's measure our volume by week and which one is higher. On a, you know, you're looking at an exercise to exercise across workout basis. Now let's average the workouts out and average the frequency out for a month.
Mm-hmm.
Now let's look at whose program has higher frequency and higher volume, higher intensity, month over month on average.
Yeah, because if the person doing the other one is going to get, if they get injured,
Yeah.
that volume that's they're already being out.
Well,
on,
it's not even
behind.
if they get injured. It's a matter of you know, it's a matter of at different points in, you know, if you're on a linear, you know, or if you're on a linear periodization model, you know, and your volume is dropping over time, in, you know, as your intensity rises. Well, then you start to look at, you know, all the other things that are dropping over time. As Louie says, you know, you're detraining because your level of, you know, I believe in most of the books it'll say your level of preparedness is going up.
Yeah.
Yeah, but your level of sort of physical fitness and your level of a very general preparedness is deteriorating. You know, your muscles are slowly atrophying. Your so many different stimuluses and so many different adaptations are atrophying. So, you know, and then of course there is that awkward period of when you have to eventually leave that graph. You know, that graph goes week 0 to 16 and then presumably starts over again, and you have this weird, you know, period where you have to start the X over again, versus with conjugate where it's, yeah, we're planning ahead for how we have to start that X. You know, we're smoothly transitioning back to, you know, the front end of the wave.
Yeah, it's kind of like he said. Why are you going to climb, like in mountaineering? Why are you going to climb to the top of the mountain, climb halfway down, and come back over? Because if you're kind of losing some of the effects of one going to another, like with the traditional periodization, or conjugate periodization, or it's undulating periodization.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like they're switching the means and methods, and they got deloads and everything else built in to where you don't really have to take periods of time down.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that way that's where the X factor is getting in.
Yeah. But so it's, yeah, once you start to look at how you involve time into your judgment of things, like everything changes. So you look at time either in the immediate or in the macro sense. You look at time in the very long-term sense. You know, when you're only looking ahead 1 week, you don't see a lot of dead ends. When you start to look ahead, you know, many months, you see like, oh, that's going to lead me to injury. You know, so it doesn't matter that it made me stronger in 10 weeks. You know, it made me marginally stronger in 10 weeks. It got me injured in 12.
Yeah. And when you're injured, you're going backwards.
Right.
Yeah.
You know.
So so how do we get to yes? You just popped up one day with some camera equipment, said, "Louie, we're doing this."
Oh well, no. He said I can. You know, he said I can kind of see how we do this, and I just said like, let's just stop right here, Lou, because I'm going to talk you into submission. And he kind of chuckled at that, and I said, "You you don't understand. It's my job. I'm gonna, you know, you can see from here. I can talk. I can hit you with just a volume of words, and excitement, and continue to just do it until you just give in and relent. And go, okay, fine. You know, like anything to get you to go away." But so he laughed at that, and I said, "It's going to be a year before I even have the ability to do it. You know, I got to go find money. I got to go find the resources that I need to do this. You know, so let's just say that it's yes. Let's move on from here, and let's assume that once it starts, because you don't actually, against a frame of reference thing, I don't actually know what Westside is like. I have the version of Westside that I've read about that's very 2D, flat, black and white version based on old articles, and you have no idea what my filmmaking process is. You don't know me at all, so you don't know what the problems are going to be. So there's no sense in trying to problem solve right now, because the things you're going to try and solve are not even going to matter. You know, the thing you're worried about aggravating you and pissing you off is not going to be the thing that actually aggravates and pisses you off. The thing that aggravates and pisses you off is going to be something you never thought of. I said, so when that time period comes, just tell me. Tell me whatever it is, and we'll work around it. If I have to leave, I'll leave.
Did y'all started from his childhood, right?
Yeah.
You start like, do you get any pictures of him playing baseball?
We talk about him playing baseball. You know, obviously we go from basically 1947 to 2018 over the course of 96 minutes. And we get into, you know, side stories of, you know, many other lifters who came through. We talk about people like Chuck Vogelpool. We talk about Matt Demmel. We talk about Dave Tate a little. We talk about Dave Hoff and Bob Coe and Laura Phelps and Amy Weisberger. We
you interview all them too?
Yeah, and we talk about the different, you know, the different eras of the gym, the different locations of the gym.
Did you go to the old locations and stuff? I know Dave talked about the old location today, but I don't know if he mentioned, because a lot of stuff happened at the old location. And this current location has really evolved in the last 3 or 4 years too, because it's constantly changing. And I think when people read Louie's work or read about Westside, they maybe read something that's 3 or 4 years old,
right?
And it's totally different now, because it's not the same. He's not trying to stay the same.
Right.
He's always evolving.
Well, one thing.
Did you get a lot of that in the film?
Yeah, and one thing that just for me personally, again, is really interesting is that, you know, as I read it, I got every issue of, say, Powerlifting USA. I think I was only missing a couple. Every issue that he ever wrote something in. And I went back and I read everything that he wrote. And so I saw how, you know, his wave periodization started as a 5-week, you know, and then I saw how many years until it was a 3.
Yeah, because he used to talk about it took 6 weeks, then you'd have to switch to maximum effort exercise. Now he switches more often than that.
Yeah, and you know, when you start to see, it's important. We do this with other fields. You know, we look at how the experiments were run, how many times they were run, and it's cataloged. Why did they change things? When they changed things, what were they trying to achieve? In lifting and strength training, again, there's all of this math and all this data, and people don't ask the question of, well, when you see a program written down and someone wants to be critical of something that Louie has done, or they want to be critical of some aspect of conjugate, it's so foolish to me because, oftentimes what they're being critical of, they're being completely ignorant and naive to the fact that that's the, at least the second iteration. Sometimes it's the 20th iteration.
Well,
and there's a reason why they ran into so many other they're going, oh, I want to tell a story, but it would really be calling someone out. So I won't. But like when you tell Louie something, Louie oftentimes won't tell you. Like he won't waste his breath to tell you. You say, well, why don't you do it this way? And someone tries to come up with their own unique spin on it. And Louie oftentimes won't even waste his breath to say, if you've read the articles, you saw that we did it that way in 1992.
Yeah,
and you'll see that in 1993, we developed these problems as a result.
Yeah.
And so we tried it another way, and we tried it this way, and we tried it that way. And sometimes the problem kept coming back. Sometimes it came back later. Sometimes it never came back.
Yeah, and I remember I was talking to Dave Tate the other day, and Dave said, I don't always agree with Louie, and I had several different things that I don't even totally agree with him at all. Then I turn around and come back and said, he was right.
Mm-hmm.
I think, and I was telling Dave, I think Louie is so many steps ahead of us that we can't see him.
Yeah.
And so it don't make sense until we start taking some of those steps to try to understand what he's doing. So as we get closer, then we can understand why this step went over here, then this step went this way. And so I think people will see just a blurb or something like, I'll just throw it out. It don't make any sense. Or they'll find something that he did years ago and try, and even Dave Tate talks about, I can't tell you what they do at Westside now because I'm not at Westside now.
Right.
And you can hear even sometimes the way Louie's doing things now is totally different than he was even doing last year. And then we're talking the difference between 2018 2019, regardless of what was happening in the early 2000s.
Right.
And so it's a constant learning, and I don't think people realize how much Louie reads and how much he's going about this stuff. And he's reading and learning, and he's not only just reading, I'm just going to stick with this. No, he's reading, learning, and experimenting.
Right. And it's that he reads, he learns, he experiments, he rereads. Because as he experiments, his context for the reading changes. Mm-hmm. I think that's the biggest step that people miss, is that they'll read, then they'll put something into action, and they don't go back and reread often enough.
And I think that's the thing, and he talks about that all the time, is he don't read a book once.
Right.
He reads a book several times. Because even for me, and I'll give an example of that, is like when I'm reading, I'll read something with having something in mind, and so I'll read this with whatever my mind's thinking, okay, I got the answer to what I want. I'll go start implementing it, then a problem occurs with what I'm implementing, then I'll go back and reread it, and somehow I read the same sentence in a different way. And so I think that's kind of what happens, and I found that over time is if I start doing something kind of like what Louie has done, is by me reading it, implementing it, something was not right here, let me go back and reread it, and it may be the same sentence, but a different thought pops in my head from the same sentence.
Exactly.
It's the thought that you get out of that sentence, not necessarily the sentence telling you what it is. And so I thought that over time has been pretty cool. And I can understand why Louie says reread it. And I've gone back and I've gone through super training several times. I'm even trying to make my own index of super training so I can go back and pull apart different things. And I've taken it where Louie got this out of this page, and this is how he's kind of putting it in context and trying to understand beyond what he's talking about. You know, so it's very interesting what happens, like you said, if you just reread something.
Yeah. Well, it's also, you work with athletes, which I think people don't understand enough. Louie often says, Westside's 5% powerlifting, 95% sports.
Well, that's what Dave Tatum made that same comment this past week. Louie's so far ahead in the sports game, people can't even realize it.
Right. But one thing that happens with Louie, and this is a thing where, again, going back to, I spot patterns. That's what I'm always looking for, patterns.
Mm-hmm.
Because if something is true, it creates patterns, and those patterns become predictable. And those patterns become indicators. When you only work with one population of athletes, then you only have this very narrow field to run experiments with. You keep running experiments with the same body types, the same personalities, the same culture. You don't have a wide variety. Then when you have, so if you only work with powerlifters, you're only being given a relatively narrow set of problems to solve, which is only making you think about that problem in a relatively narrow sense. But again, the physics are simple, but they're expansive.
Mm-hmm.
Concepts are simple, but they're expansive. You can twist them, you can look at them from all these different angles and draw something different. You can, this happens to me all the time. I will learn there can be a concept I already know about. I already know about the workings of a concept, but I've never thought about that concept in a slightly different manner. And all of a sudden, you come up to me with a new problem. You ask me a problem I've never thought about before. And meanwhile, in my head, I already have everything necessary to solve that problem, but I've never been stimulated to search for that answer.
Yeah.
So Louie's in there, and then a bobsledder comes in. And he doesn't know shit about bobsledding, but they tell him, I'm having this problem, and he looks at them, and he's assessing their movement patterns, and he's looking at their build, and he's trying to figure. It's like he's using X-ray vision to see inside.
Where's this puzzle piece fitting? Because he sees the overall picture.
Right, but he's coming at it with, oftentimes, he's not bogged down by, well, what's the coaching culture within that sport. He's just looking at like the pure mathematics of it. Mm-hmm. And so something may jump out to him, but it's a problem inherent to that sport that he's never seen anywhere else. Mm-hmm. So it's a new problem to him. So then he takes, he knows how to do math, and you've just written down an unsolved equation that he's never seen. And now he takes what's there, and he takes what he knows, and he just keeps solving and keeps solving and keeps solving. And boom, he's found out something new. No one taught him anything. It was simply the search for new knowledge that created a new lesson.
Yeah.
It all that was needed was a simple impulse to look at something new.
It's just kind of like what I was telling a little bit ago was all this happened, so I went back and looked at it, and I found something new within that context that I was reading, and that's kind of where he does. And people's got to realize he trains powerlifters, but he also has MMA fighters. Mm-hmm. He has professional football players. Mm-hmm. He's got track sprinters, and so rugby players. He's even helped rugby teams nationally. He's been a consultant for the Green Bay Packers. It's just not powerlifting. I think people see the lifting and they just want to write it off as powerlifting.
Right.
When, like you said, he's addressing these problems or these issues with the sport, making the athlete better, and it's so hard to portray because people only want to see what's on the surface. No one wants to go 2 or 3 questions in.
Right.
They just want to look and see. Okay, just move it on.
Yeah. Well, it's the same as going back to again your free squatter and your box squatter, and your kid who just wanted to get stronger and your kid who wanted to get faster. Mm-hmm.
And the kid who wanted to get faster, he did the strength training, he did the strength exercises that you told him. And then the other kid said, no, I just need to get stronger. So he didn't do box squats. And both kids get stronger at equal rates, but one produces force faster.
Yeah.
And the one who produces force, it's like ordering off a menu. If I said you can get, you can get a burger with fries and a drink, or you can just get a burger and they both cost $6.99. Why would you ever order just the burger? It's the same cost.
Yeah.
It's the same time. It's the same effort. Why wouldn't you get everything for the same? Why wouldn't you get the most bang for your buck?
Yeah. And people, and I'll get on this. Like I had a 17-year-old kid. His name is Alex. And we didn't do a regular squat. When he was lifting, we lifting USAPL. USAPL depth is totally different.
Yeah.
You're deep with that stuff. And so to hit squat depth at USAPL, this is what I had this may have been at Raw Nationals or something at a high level where we had some IPF judges there. We box squatted all the time. Now I have some kids that will have to transition to regular squat sometimes, but this kid, we box squatted all the time. We didn't do a single regular squat before his meet. 17-year-old kid, 661 squat.
Yeah.
And so we just box squatted only. And people, and that one kid, and I just kind of got on that tangent because that one kid was scared that if he did box squats, it would not transfer over to his regular squat. And some people say, well, box squat, you can squat more weight with box squat. Well, it really typically depends on the athlete. But more times than not, bar velocities are slower off the box because you got to break up the concentric chain, and so you don't have the momentum and the effect of the bounce or rebound out of the phase of it.
Right.
And so the kids may be achieving sometimes higher squats with the box depending on whatever situation we're in, but it's harder to get a faster speed off the box, which that training effect's going to have a lot more, because it's harder to start at ground zero when you're in your 40-yard dash stance. You're stopped. You don't get to do a jump back, start, and take off running.
Right.
So once we're building these specific strength needed, or it's not even the specific, it's specific strength with specific strength qualities. We got to develop a higher rate of force development quickly. So we're trying to break up the concentric chain so that we can create more explosive or starting strength. Where the other kid, when they're just doing a regular squat, they're not developing that starting strength.
Right.
And I just call that general strength.
Right.
So. Well,
this is a thing where, so I think like maybe 2-3 weeks ago, I saw a discussion online on Twitter between Travis Nash and a bunch of other coaches. Travis, I've noticed lately, has gotten into using Twitter to have a lot of arguments and debates. I know Travis, I've met Travis, and I listen to a lot of Travis's stuff. I agree with Travis on a whole lot of things. But oftentimes when I disagree with people, I don't actually disagree with their point. I disagree with sort of a myopic view of what they're saying. Because again, I think that everything can be expansive and everything can be subtle. If you can contextualize the difference between any two reps, then you've created variation. If you can feel the difference between your hand, one finger in or out, then that's variation because you can recognize the variable.
Yeah.
A lot of people, they're not sensitive enough or attuned enough, or they are so sort of rigid in their thought process that they do not seek to observe variables. But again, I'm always looking for patterns, and I'm looking for, very subtle indicators. But so anyways, they're having this discussion online about whether or not you need to box squat. And for athletes, or for any reason, why do you or why do you not need to box squat? And a lot of people said, well, you need the specificity. So, I saw comments like specificity is king, and that's just untrue. Specificity is always, all of this is always relative, and a lot of it is relative to your ideas or your athlete's idea of what they need. If you have an athlete that is, able to wrap his mind around a broad array of ideas, then like anything is possible. That variation can be big or small, and the athlete can handle it. But so I said, again, if that concept is true in powerlifting, then it's also true in weightlifting. Then it's also true over here. If that concept is true, because we're talking about physics, the physics don't change. Gravity doesn't change. So if it's true with one movement, the movement itself is arbitrary. So I said, again, what's the main, what's one of the main things about the box squat? It's breaking up the eccentric and concentric.
Yeah, and it's kind of even further than that. It's kind of like speed sometimes trumps load, and so that's why the dynamic effort works. And so it's the speed of the movement, not necessarily sometimes the pattern of the movement.
Right.
I mean,
well, so I said, okay, so let's remove the barbell entirely, and let's get a much, you all are talking about anecdotes from maybe the slim margin of people that you've trained. I said, let's go to combines. Football players and basketball players. Let's throw the 40 out the window. Let's look at something raw, something more pure.
vertical jump.
Jump mat verticals. NBA players. At the NBA, there were in 27. I looked at the data. I think that I had was from the year 2017. It said, okay, from the year 2017, there were zero NBA draft picks, 0 players invited to the NBA Combine with a vertical over 40 inches. And then for football, there was something like 14 over 40. And now some people would say, oh, but football, there's so many more people. And you go, yeah, but a lot of them are linemen.
They don't rely. Basketball players are probably some of the most athletic people out there.
And they have relatively terrible verticals.
Yeah.
And they jump all day long.
And they're horrible at it.
And they're terrible at it.
And I even got even more proof to back that up. I was a Division II strength coach for a university in Georgia for 2 years. And my guys won back-to-back Peach Belt Conference champions. But what I did to create buy-in, because they don't, who's this guy? I play basketball. I never had to lift weights. Well, I got to lift weights.
Right.
Well, when I out-jumped every one of them, they started listening because I don't look like I can jump.
Right.
And so then I brought the jump mats in and out-jumped them, and they could not beat me no matter how hard they tried. And they could not believe that I out-jumped them. And then, and not only that, as I got such kinesthetic awareness, is that I started jumping, and if I said I'm on 25, I jumped 25. If I went at 26.3, I was able to jump at 26.3. Not always, but luckily enough on those days, I hit those specific numbers. I'm going to jump at 28.1. And I did that about 3 times in a row where I called my number and I hit exactly what I wanted to say.
Well, and that's...
And so then I said, look, if I go, I'll hit a 33.2. And so I did. And once I did that about 3-4 times, I quit because I said, my luck's going to run out. And so that's the last time I did that. And then they said, what am I going to do to jump on it?
Right.
And I said, just listen. And so what they did is, okay, now if you do this, y'all won't have to jump on it. So that jump mat would allow me to give them visual feedback instantly to where they were saying, hey, oh man, he's right. And so, and for people who's going to hate on the jump mat, I had a guy who went to the Rams. He jumped the exact same thing on the jump mat as he did the Vertex. And I had another 300-pound lineman jump 34-inch vertical on the mat, jumped a 34-inch vertical on the Vertex. So they were consistent with what the jump mat said. The National Strength Conditioning Association even correlated the two together. But people said, yeah, you can cheat the jump mat. Okay, yeah, once you learn how to cheat it, you're going to have to learn how to beat your cheat. And there's no beating your cheat.
Right.
So once you can cheat it, yeah, that's fine. But if your cheek gets better, your others are going to get better.
Yeah.
You know, it's just kind of like if you got an incline, you increase your incline. That's how the conjugate stuff works. You
Yeah.
improve one, and this one improves the other.
Yeah. But to go back to the combines for football and basketball, you had it, even if you broke it down to, say, point guards, because you want to constrain for relative similar body types, and you said, okay, point guards versus outside wide receivers. The outside wide receivers on average would be the same height, but considerably heavier, yet would outjump the point guard by 7-8 inches on average. And you go, okay, so again, talking about specificity and the need to, you know, we can't throw off this motor pattern. Well, football players are very rarely jumping. They're very rarely jumping vertically. They're very rarely jumping horizontally. They are very rarely jumping
at all.
But you think about the sport of football, because again, these are also combines where the kid from Florida State who, you know, and again, I'm Florida State alum, and I love Florida State, but not this program, but the coaches who were there before, they were churning out offensive and defensive linemen who, some of them had one come and work with us, you know, like after he left Florida State, he could not hit a 300-pound above parallel squat. He weighed well over 300 pounds. You know, he got stapled with 295. And this was a kid who was in the program for 5 years. But so you have kids who are in programs that are terrible, kids who are in programs that are great, kids who are in programs that have high injury rates, kids who are in programs that have low injury rates. And on basketball, you do the same thing. So there's a very broad difference between the type of training each one does, and yet consistently, repeatedly, and you can look at the same thing holds true in high school combines. Football players out-jump basketball players despite outweighing them. And so you go, okay, there has to be something at work that's causing this. Because even when you train them the same, football players out-jump basketball players. Then you start to look at, and this is, I said, this is why we box jump, or this is why we box squat. Because each of them, when their objective is to max their jump, so to produce not only the most force, but the most force in the same amount of time. Produce more force in the same amount of time and you'll jump higher. Produce the same amount of force in less time and you'll jump higher. So even when the goal is the same, doing the similar exercise, the specificity has not only no benefit, it has decreased benefit versus jumping far less, but starting 60 plays a game from a dead stop. Start 60 plays a game from a dead stop. Break up the eccentric and concentric.
Yeah.
Start from a dead stop. So then, again, I said this in a thread and I said, this is why you box squat. And a lot of people got it wrong and said, this is why basketball needs a better culture of weightlifting. I said, no, that's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is, this is why you box squat, because number one, you do not need to repeat the specific motion to get better at it. In fact, you don't have to do it nearly at all. Because most of these motions that coaches are talking about doing, it's not like shooting a basketball. Squatting is exceptionally simple. Even the Olympic lifts are simple. You don't need to repeat them all the time. Your kid just needs to know what they are and be confident in them.
And a box squat, who cares about if it's a regular squat or a box squat? I mean, with a box squat, with an athlete, especially a basketball player, they're long-limbed athletes. So with a box, you can adjust the box accordingly, and you don't have to worry about it hitting a certain amount of depth.
Right.
Just kind of, we was talking earlier about Dave Tate. He was worried more about increasing bone density and muscular strength than he was hitting a certain depth. These basketball players, they're long-limbed athletes. They're not going to be the greatest powerlifters, but they can use some of the greatest powerlifting methods.
Yeah. Well, and sometimes those basketball players turn into like Half-Thor or Brian Shaw. Those are former basketball players who just bulked up.
Yeah, 400 something.
Yeah.
I mean, you're talking, these guys are 6'8", 6'9". So
But Hafthor's a 1,000-pound raw squatter. All it took was he had to put 400 pounds onto his frame so his leverage is filled out. But what I'm saying is, and what I'm getting at is that, you know, if the idea of specificity for squatting held true, it would also hold true for jumping, but it doesn't. It's easily disprovable for jumping. And then again, because I said this in response to Travis Mash, so a lot of Olympic lifting coaches got in, and they said, well, my athletes jump well, and my athletes have great starts. And I said, well, how do the Olympic lifts start? A dead stop. And I go, so if you have a box squatter, an Olympic lifter, and a free squatter, and each are, you know, ideologues who never, you know, who swear by their method, and you had to place money on a vertical or a 40, who's you know, like, who are you putting money on to win? Who are you putting money on to lose? The Olympic lifting guy's going to put money on him to win. The box squatter's going to put money on him to win. But they're both going to put money on the you know, habitual religious zealot free squatter to lose.
Yeah, I don't know if I mentioned this earlier or not, because but the kid who box squatted with his friend versus the kid who did not, guess who reached the 40-inch vertical first? The kid who box squatted.
Really?
The other kid's vertical hardly went up at all.
Yeah.
Although he did get stronger, so sometimes just
exactly, that's what I'm saying.
And so sometimes they're saying, well, just because you get stronger, well, yeah, but I mean, strength comes in what type of strength are you developing? You know, you've got to be explosive.
Yeah.
You know, you got to. And if a box squat,
and who's going to progress longer? If you push both of their progressions out over many months, one of them shifted their entire force velocity curve. One of them just distorted it.
Yeah.
The one who distorted it, eventually he's going to run out of room to continue distorting it.
Yeah.
He's going to become fully adapted. The one who continues to push it, you know, who just continues to shift it, his speed is staying high as his, you know, his rate of force development is staying high as his ability to create forces, you know, as his maximal force is going up. That kid's going to be able to progress without impediment for much longer than the kid who, you know, gets slower while getting stronger. That kid eventually, he's going to hit the impediment of time where, yeah, he's able to grind, but his lungs are the same size, and his, you know, his heart is the same size, and the volume of his, you know, arteries, and he only has so much blood, and he only has so much air, and he only has so much energy. And so he can't continue. He can strain for 8 seconds. He's not going to be able to strain for 15. You know, like he's versus the other kid. He's hitting 5 pounds more in the same amount of time.
Yeah.
That kid's going to be able to. It's the same as when you look at Hoff, or even you look at raw lifters who do have some longevity, and they're the ones who, when they lift a heavy weight, they can lift it faster.
Yeah, and my raw lifter that squatted 661 at 17 years old, box squatted. No, I mean, this is squatting raw, no gear or anything. So box squatted, I obviously transferred to where he needed to be.
Right.
And it also helped. I've had back-to-back state champion shot putter. We box squatted. And so it's just, to me, I don't think there's an argument, but there's always an argument.
Yeah. There's always an argument when someone's not looking at all of the variables.
Or I don't think, you know what happens? I think they're arguing just to be arguing, but I don't think they're testing. Because they don't want to see that they're wrong.
Yeah.
You know, I think they're kind of, so that's the biggest thing I try to do is make sure we test. And that's what Louie does all the time. He's always testing to make sure it works. Because they're going to competitions to freaking win. They're not going to competitions to lose. So, well, Mike, you got to get to bed, right?
Eventually, yeah. I've had 90 minutes sleep in the last 2 days, so
yeah.
With a 13 and a half hour drive in the middle.
Yeah, we've been talking another hour and 50 minutes, so we got about almost 3 hours of talking done. I don't know what time it is. So.
I'm afraid to look at my clock.
So, well, Michael, let's tell them where they can find you. y'all please download the iTunes pre-order, Westside Film, Westside Versus the World. Just type in Westside Versus the World on iTunes and it'll pop up. So, Michael, where can they find you?
They can find me on Instagram or Facebook. My handle's at Westside Film. I'm also on Twitter. Don't use that much. And you can go to westsideversustheworld.com to find out more. And again, May 7th, iTunes, Amazon, Google Play, on demand, everywhere. Look for Westside Versus the World.
Westside Versus the World will be always Westside Versus the World.
Yeah.
So anyway, hey, y'all can find me on Instagram at Explosive Mechanics, at Explosive MEC on Twitter, and you can follow me on Facebook, facebook.com/Explosive Mechanics. Thank y'all for watching. Thank y'all for listening. Michael, thank you for coming on and taking time out of your day. I know you didn't get any sleep. You got a busy day tomorrow.
No problem. I hope that enough of that rambling made sense, because I'm pretty deliriously tired.
Yeah, you can see it. The eyes are. We're sitting here after about 3 hours. His eyes went from white to red.
Yeah.
You can't probably pick that up on camera. But everyone's so thankful for your time, and I thank you for the doing this of the film. I can't wait to watch it. So anyway, thank y'all for watching. Thank y'all for listening. Michael, thank you.
Thank you.
You know, so my talk to y'all sitting there.